127 billionaires who are already announced in part of the Giving Pledge in our annual letter, and that is that we believe that the lives of the poor will improve more in the next 15 years than at any other time in history. And it's because of innovations in things like health, such as vaccines, innovations in farming, things like seeds getting out there more that are drought resistance, for instance, digital banking, that is really becoming ubiquitous in the developing world, and also education, digital tools in the education sector. In all four of those sectors, we're seeing incredible innovation that's really changing the lives of the poor fundamentally. Years are rotavirus and the pneumococcus. Both of those vaccines are coming out around
the... If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes.
All right, so we're here with Lawrence Kent, Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let's start off with a very basic question. What is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and why should people care?
Okay. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was started about 15 years ago, and it's a charitable foundation that's based on two very important principles. The first one is that every life has equal value, and the second one is that everyone, no matter where they live, should have the chance to live a healthy and productive life. So Bill and Melinda, they've dedicated most of their fortune to this charitable foundation, and their friend, Warren Buffett, has also dedicated most of his fortune towards this charitable purpose. So they make a lot of grants. They give money to partners that are trying to help make a contribution towards achieving that positive vision. So I think about half the money that the Gates Foundation gives away in grants is trying to tackle big global health issues like AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria. These are the diseases that kill the most people around the world. And now with Ebola as well, we're making investments through partners to try to tackle these problems through research and through outreach and sort of public interventions. So that's what we're doing in that space. But we're also trying to tackle the problem of poverty. And if you look at the issue of poverty, the poorest people in the world, the ultra poor, they live in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of South Asia, in Bangladesh and India. And those people, most of those people are farmers, but they farm at very low levels of productivity, and that's a major reason that they are so poor, so food insecure. So what we're trying to do with the Gates Foundation is try to help those smallholder farmers, most of them who are actually women, increase the productivity of their farms as a way to lift themselves out of food insecurity and poverty. So it's a major focus. Within our agricultural portfolio, and I think you're interested in agriculture, biotechnology plays an important role. Now, there's a lot of forms of biotechnology. So we do a lot of crop improvement work, breeding work. Now, that's conventional breeding, but more and more it's being accelerated through the tools of biotechnology, like genome-wide selection, like doubled haploids, like molecular markers, DNA fingerprinting. That permeates a lot of our investments. But the most contentious issue is, of course, genetic modification, or GMOs, and that's the one that gets a lot of attention.
And you talked a little bit about drought tolerance in corn, and that actually came from the United States, but it's working its way into Africa now?
That's correct. Yeah, it must have been about 8 years ago when one of our partners in Africa, an NGO called the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, they had made their priorities, and they said one of the most important constraints, maybe the most important constraint to improving productivity of corn in Africa, and corn is the most important crop in Africa, is susceptibility to drought. 95% of all the corn grown in Africa is rain-fed and therefore very susceptible to drought, and drought is becoming more and more frequent because of climate change. They heard about what Monsanta was doing in the United States in terms of developing drought tolerance in corn as a biotech trait. They wound up getting together and talking about it. Hey, Monsanto, could you make this trait available royalty-free for Africans? We have drought here in Africa, and it's a big threat to our food security. Why not share your technology royalty-free? Monsanto agreed, and they formed a partnership called the Water Efficient Maize for Africa project that's bringing some of the best of Monsanto's transgenic technologies, some of their other forms of biotechnology in terms of molecular markers, some of their best international germplasm, and they're cooperating with 5 countries in Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, and South Africa, to develop a whole suite of drought-tolerant hybrid maize varieties that are being made available to smallholder farmers just starting in the last couple of years. We expect to see a lot more rollout over the next few years. We don't sort of reject or embrace any particular technology. We're really about solutions. We say whatever will get us to a safe and effective solution is a technology that we want to at least explore in the R&D space, including GM technologies. So we're investing in the development of things like drought-tolerant corn that I mentioned to you, or virus-resistant cassava, or golden rice. We've got a suite of projects that we're investing to create real products that offer real benefits. So that's one thing we're doing. At the same time, we're saying the regulatory systems in Africa are essentially underdeveloped, or maybe I should say under development. So they're working to create functional regulatory systems. So there are fully functional regulatory systems in only a handful of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, like South Africa, Sudan, Egypt, Burkina Faso. They're functioning similar to a North American regulatory system, able to approve the release of these biotech crops to farmers. Many other countries, probably another dozen, they've gotten to the stage where their regulatory systems will allow for field trials to move forward for GMO crops, which are a very important sort of first step. And we hope that they will graduate and build up the capacity and confidence to eventually to look at applications for commercial or general release that would be the pathway to getting safe and effective technologies to smallholder farmers. So we're investing in the technology, we're investing in improving the regulatory system, we're also making some limited investments in sort of the public outreach area.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see the large group here working on how science can improve the world. Well, you're here in Seattle, which is the city I grew up in, as you heard. And just a few blocks from here are the headquarters of the Gates Foundation that goes back to the year 2000. In fact, Melinda and I just earlier this week wrote our annual letter talking about the progress, and in this case, particularly talking about the first 20 years. Right from the beginning, we chose the focus to be eliminating inequities, particularly in health in developing countries. We thought that we could make a huge difference, both in the R&D priorities and in the delivery systems, to make sure the latest medicines were getting out to all the children in the world. And this work has been very gratifying. It's been very successful. And in fact, today I want to talk about some things that we're just on the verge of being able to do that will help us advance that mission very, very dramatically. The goal being that a child born anywhere has a very low chance of being malnourished or dying below the age of 5, and that these big infectious diseases like HIV, TB, and malaria, that we believe those can largely be eradicated. Nearly 250 million of children are malnourished, and what that means is that they never achieve full physical or mental development. And both for them individually and for the countries they live in, this is a huge problem, and one that has definitely been under researched. So to get to this health equity, of course, science is where we start. We need governments to fund basic sciences. We need lots of partners that nurture the ideas and are willing to take big risks, not only on specific tools, but on platforms that would allow this work to go faster and develop very, very low-cost products. We also have to understand that the health systems in these countries have very limited capabilities. So anything we do that requires a doctor, that's not going to scale to reach the entire world. So, it's got to be super low cost, easy delivery, very little training involved. But it does represent an opportunity. These developing countries are where the population growth is taking place. It's where the economic growth is taking place. By 2050, sub-Saharan Africa will be over 2 billion people. And that's more than twice the people in Europe and North America. And so there's a lot of reasons to care about Africa. We have an opportunity with the advance of tools like artificial intelligence and gene-based editing technologies to build this new generation of health solutions so that they are available to everyone on the planet. And I'm very excited about this. The rate of progress will be faster. The number of people who care about this or engaged in this, partly because of the success of these last 20 years, I feel there's real momentum and some of these challenges can be solved. We also have recent breakthroughs like the gene editing technologies, including CRISPR. And so, we should be able to use that for very low cost, point of care precision diagnostics. We should be able to use that for therapeutics. And we should gain understandings of how to do vaccines, even vaccines that the turnaround time, instead of being the typical 3 or 4 years, literally at some point we'd be able to create in months. And we want to use these tools not just for orphan diseases or not just for diseases in rich countries, but also for the diseases that predominantly afflict people in the countries where most of humanity lives in, the middle income and the low income countries. In terms of genetics, I'm sure we've all read the history, going back to when people didn't know, Pauling didn't know where is that information encoded, and Crick, Watson, and Franklin laid the foundation for modern genetics by understanding how DNA encoded that information. And it's only 15 years ago that the Human Genome Project gave us the basic blueprint and let us now identify sequences that are associated with different diseases. It was 8 years ago that CRISPR came along, and it continues to evolve in some pretty fantastic ways, including the accuracy of the editing. Today, over 89% of genetic variants that we know are associated with human disease can be corrected. That is, if you get into the cells of interest, you can make those corrections. Last year, human trials using these molecular scissors of CRISPR did start to do things like solve sickle cell disease. So we're really on the verge of a direct human benefit. So these are just two examples of powerful tools that we can apply in a narrow sense or in a very broad sense to improve the human condition. I want to give some other examples and talk about how you actually get from these great new tools all the way out to things like reducing malaria deaths. One partnership that we've initiated recently is one with the NIH to go and develop very low-cost gene editing tools with two particular goals in mind. One is sickle cell disease, and the second is an HIV cure. We believe that over the next decade, we will be able to make this breakthrough. The vision is to have in vivo gene editing techniques that you just do a single injection using vectors that target and edit these blood-forming cells, which are down in the bone marrow, with very high efficiency and very few off-target edits. And that's the vision of how you could literally get out and save all of those lives and bring this incredible disease burden to an end. Similarly with HIV, the goal of the collaboration is to investigate in vivo gene editing that could drive a functional cure for all of those 38 million people who are infected. Again, it's a high bar in terms of how simple and how low cost and how rare the side effects would have to be. But we do believe that it's possible. Amazingly, gene editing is also the most exciting tool for us for the work we do in malaria. Malaria, you probably know it's gone from 1 million deaths a year most of the young children in Africa now, down to about 400,000. But it's a very difficult disease to bring down from that level. There's outside biting, there's drug resistance. It's very, very difficult. Here, the idea is instead of editing human genetics, it's to use CRISPR to create what are called gene drives. That is a gene which is inherited by all the offspring. If one of the two parents has this particular mechanism, then all of the offspring that has a parent with this, it's driven into the progeny. And so we're working on genes that either reduce mosquito populations or eliminate the Anopheles mosquitoes, which are a very small portion of all mosquitoes, but those are the ones that carry malaria. And if you could change their gut structure a little bit, then the parasite would not be able to burrow through their stomach back into their salivary gland, which is part of how that cycle of infection is completed. Another new approach that the foundation is very enthused about is the organ on a chip. And in simple terms, the technology allows in vitro modeling of human organisms in a way that mimics how they work in the human body. There's some degree of simplification. Most of these systems are single organ systems. They don't recapitulate everything, but some of the key elements we do see there, and including some of the disease states. So, for example, with the intestine, the liver, the kidney, it lets us understand drug kinetics and drug activity. We also are culturing a human intestinal microbiome on a chip that will let us understand the interactions between microbiome, nutrients, and pathogens in a systematic way. Risk. Another organ on a chip that's very promising for us is the lymphoid organoids to understand vaccine responses. Could let us develop vaccines far faster and understand things like adjuvants that are very critical for a lot of the new vaccines we're working on. Well, another area that I wanted to mention is the connection between climate change and health. Climate change rightly is getting a lot of focus, but the richness of how we go about minimizing the damage and reducing those greenhouse gases, certainly you wouldn't say that we have a plan. The term for the reduction of the gases is mitigation, and the term for minimizing the negative effects is adaptation. Adaptation, that is helping people deal with climate change, hasn't got nearly as much attention. And that's partly because the vast portion of the suffering that will be caused is for subsistence farmers near equatorial regions. And so you have this mismatch where the place where the money and science are and the place where the historical emissions are is almost entirely separate from where most of the suffering will be. As you get more extreme weather conditions, floods, droughts, you get more pests and disease, and it means the percentage of years where your crop almost entirely fails will go up very substantially. And of course, then that means those kids, the rates of malnutrition can go up even higher, and as I mentioned, that very directly connects to the survival rates and the ability of those people to achieve their potential, to be educated and get that country out of a cycle of poverty and move beyond it. And so, in a lot of ways, because of these complex dynamics, the impacts of climate change for the poor countries really aren't being talked enough about and elucidated as much as they should. Now, there are potential scientific innovations here. Historically, the Green Revolution was fantastic with the cereal crops in terms of avoiding widespread malnutrition that many scientists predicted. Education better. The thing that our education work and health work have in common is they're focused on equity. Healthier and more equal world, I think, is something that we should accelerate. Disease is not only a symptom of inequality, but it's a huge cause. And likewise, low-quality public education drives inequality. When we first started our foundation, we were very optimistic about the power of innovation. You know, I had the experience from Microsoft where that all went well. And looking at the global health work, that optimism really has been borne out. And if anything, I see that innovation accelerating. So I think this goal of giving every person the opportunity to live a healthy, productive life is achievable with great science. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Vandana Shiva. She is a world-famous environmental activist from India. She's a laureate of the Alternative Nobel Prize in 1993. She's author of numerous books. Her latest is called Oneness versus 1%. Thank you very much for being on the phone.
My pleasure.
I want to begin early on. You were not supposed to be an activist. You were a physicist, you wanted to work in nuclear energy, and then you came across in the early 1970s what is known in India as the Chipko movement. Can you explain us how you came across?
Yes, I was training to be in India's nuclear establishment, but then my sister woke me up to the hazards of nuclear. She was a medical doctor. And I went deeper into theoretical physics. I was going to Canada to do a PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. And before I went, I wanted to visit some of my favorite forests in the Himalaya. I've grown up in the Himalayan forest. And this forest I had trekked in was gone. The stream that came from this oak forest was gone. And while returning to Delhi, I talked to a tea shop owner, and he talked about how there's a new movement called Chipko. So in my heart, I said, I'm going to come back every vacation and be a volunteer for this movement. Women came out to say, we're going to hug the trees. You cannot cut the trees because from the trees come our water. The trees stabilize the mountain and prevent landslides. The trees prevent floods and droughts, and they also give us everything we need. We will be huggers of trees. The name Chipko means to hug. And I learned all my lessons of ecological activism from the women of the Himalaya who had never been to school but knew everything about ecology, knew everything about biodiversity. What they called soil, water, and pure air today talked about as ecological functions of the forests. That forests are not timber mines. And a lot of my change in the understanding of the fact that nature is the basis of economy came from my engagement with Chipko. My respect for women's knowledge, indigenous knowledge, came from my engagement with Chipko. And it totally turned my own head upside down because physics, you know, high in the world, you know something others don't. And I realized everyone has knowledge and you must respect it.
So you've became really engaged in this. You've been an opponent of big multinational corporations, especially Monsanto, to name just one, because of what you describe as their nefarious influence on agriculture. There are a number of examples. There was the BT cotton in India, especially. And you said, you know, this is not a matter of helping farmers grow their land, but actually making them dependent on those big corporations.
You know, the entry of corporations into agriculture is so wrong because the corporations only bring poisons. Most of them have roots in Hitler's Germany, in making gases to kill people in concentration camps.
That was not their aim. Their aim was to give people enough.
No, the aim was to make chemicals that kill people. After the wars, they said, why should we stop making these chemicals? Let's say now they'll kill pests. They will give fertilizer. Fertilizers were made in the same factories that made explosives and ammunition for Hitler's Germany.
That's not the same goal.
No, the companies are the same and the processes are the same. So your rhetoric might change, but the goal does not. The materiality of a death-making chemical doesn't change when you say it's now for feeding the world. I did a book on the violence of the Green Revolution because Punjab, the most fertile land of India, was destroyed. And then when Monsanto came in as a result of globalization, because till the 90s, 90% of the seed was in farmers' hands, and the rest came from the public sector, from government labs, research institutions. So Monsanto came illegally, didn't take any approval, with the promise that they would increase farmers' incomes and have this magical technology to control pests. Well, the bollworm is now resistant. Farmers are in debt. Farmers are committing suicide. The area has been ruined. The pollinators are gone. There's no pollinator. The groundwater's gone. So there's nothing about the ecosystem. So I save seeds. We brought organic cotton seeds back. We work with the Gandhi ashrams on hand spinning and hand weaving of this organic cotton. The economy in the villages where we work has jumped tenfold because now the wealth is staying in the village rather than being siphoned off as Monsanto's profits. And I read a new study that says because we've saved seeds, we brought local seeds that can be saved back into the economy. Monsanto has lost 11 million.
I want to get to your latest book because you widen, I would say, your attacks is not only Monsanto and the likes, but also others. You attack what you describe as the billionaire dictators, especially one man, I should say, Bill Gates, who you describe as the Christopher Columbus, I'm quoting you, of modern times. Attack what you describe as the billionaire dictators, especially one man, I should say, Bill Gates, who you describe as the Christopher Columbus, I'm quoting you, of modern times, and that's not a compliment, obviously, whose mission is to impose, quote unquote, genetically modified organisms and digital dictatorship to small farmers across the world. Bill Gates, who's donated billions to improve public health in poor countries and so on, you're saying essentially he's a dictator and he's there not to help, but to make people poorer, more dependent.
Well, Bill Gates is actually continuing the work of Monsanto because Monsanto had so many movements, and we held a tribunal on Monsanto. A buyer bought up Monsanto, but when Bill Gates pours money into Africa for feeding the poor in Africa and preventing famine, what's he doing? He's pushing the failed green revolution. He's pushing chemicals, pushing GMOs, pushing patents, and now pushing new...
Knowingly, or he thinks it's a good thing and he may be wrong?
Well,
it's not the same thing.
There's enough evidence of what it does. There are enough letters to him from farmers of Africa, from governments of Africa to say, this is not the way to go. The United Nations accepts agroecology, working with ecological systems as the best way to go. Now, Bill Gates is trying very hard to shift the patenting issue now to digital. So you just take a genomic map and you say, my invention, you don't create a seed. Seed is self-organized, self-making, and evolution in continuity. Just by making a map, a genome, and you have no idea what the seed does. And this is something he's pushing very, very hard. My book records how he financed DivSeek. I've talked about how he's pirated seeds we have saved that tolerate salt and floods. And he says invention. This biopiracy is a bit like Columbus, where Columbus is supposed to have discovered America when he basically went as a pirate. Why do I call him today's Columbus? Because he's carving out new colonies. Software should have stayed open software.
So you say he has a strategy, a nefarious strategy, what you describe as philanthrocapitalism, is a nefarious enterprise. And so you're not saying he's using the wrong methods, he's pursuing a wrong goal with self-interest. You also attack Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, saying they're all linked together. I mean, this reeks a bit of conspiracy theory, doesn't it?
Well, my book is based on the new evidence that's coming out. All you have to do is see the ownership, and I have data in the book on how there's common ownership. We stopped Mark Zuckerberg from trying to get into Indian agriculture. It was a big mobilization of people who believe in the open internet.
What did he want to do?
Well, basically what they do is they mine the data from the farmers. And right now, all over the world, there's new debates on privacy issues, on the data mining. There's new books, a new form of capitalism, which is surveillance capitalism, where you basically have turned human beings into your new raw material. So Bill Gates does both. He takes living resources and our seeds and biodiversity, mines it into data and wants ownership along with his friends. And Mark Zuckerberg mines your data and your behaviors and turns it into the raw material, both of corporate world for selling things, which is why strange advertisements pop up after you've sent a message to a friend, and manipulating elections. I have a chapter in the book on the hijack of democracy. You have enough data on what happened with Facebook selling data to Cambridge Analytica and how we are popping up with artificial intelligence leaders. This is a major threat to democracy.
So this is why you're calling them billionaire dictators, because you think they're not helping democracy, but actually threatening and even killing it? I mean, isn't this too much?
No, I have grown up in an India that was post-independence. I've grown up in an India that had absolutely no corporations. I've grown up in an India where democracy works. And therefore, when I see the imposition of digital transactions and criminalization of cash between poor people, I basically see this as a dictatorship. I call it digital dictatorship. When I watch, not just in India, but in Africa and other parts of the world, now that we have the data that is showing that native seeds have more nutrition, they produce more food, they have no cost because you don't have to use chemicals, that local biodiversity is the way to feeding the world, in spite of all that evidence, in spite of the evidence in the United Nations, in the FAO, in UNCTAD, every agency, Bill Gates is still imposing and forcing GMOs, which is a failed enterprise. And he's not just imposing GMOs, he's taking what has failed and rejected by governments. My government threw the BT aubergine of Monsanto out. Bill Gates resurrects it in Bangladesh. We rejected the golden rice for solving the problem of blindness. He finances it to continue through Philippines. So he's taking all the failed projects with the wrong thinking that life is like a word program and can be chopped and cut and pasted, when it's an amazing complexity of self-organization. And scientists call it autopoiesis, self-organization, writing your own poetry. That's what life does. He is absolutely ignoring all of this new knowledge that new science is giving us and imposing a failed technology with a huge cost to the planet, only so there can be monopolies and people and farmers aren't free to have their seed.
Vandana Shiva, obviously you have strong views and we're happy that you were able to share them with us. Thank you very much for watching this interview here on France 24.